You are not weak. You are not too sensitive. You were trained to be predictable, and predictable people are easy to manage. Somewhere along the way, everyone who ever got close to you took notes. Your temper, your soft spots, the exact sentence that makes you apologize, even when you did nothing wrong. They know which button ends the argument in their favor, and they have used it more times than you have counted. This is the most important warning you will hear all year, and I mean that without exaggeration. Because there are 7 behaviors that separate the people who get used from the people who get feared, in the healthy sense of that word. Feared as in respected. Feared as in nobody tests them twice. Most people will only ever manage 2 or 3 of these behaviors by accident, under stress, and then lose them the moment things calm down. The 7th behavior is the one nobody talks about, and it is the one that decides, permanently, whether you are the one giving orders or the one taking them. Stay until the end, because I am not telling you what it is yet. Let's start with the man who wrote the manual on power and never once apologized for it. Niccolo Machiavelli spent years watching Italian courts destroy people, and he noticed something almost nobody wants to admit out loud. The people who lost were not the weak ones. They were the reactive ones, the ones who could be provoked into a scene, into a confession, into an outburst that told every rival in the room exactly where the pressure points were. Machiavelli did not believe in dignity for its own sake. He believed dignity was a weapon, and an unreadable face was armor nobody could pierce. Behavior 1. You stop reacting emotionally the moment someone tries to provoke you. Picture a boardroom. Someone senior makes a joke at your expense, timed perfectly, delivered with a smile so the room can pretend it was harmless. Every eye turns to you. This is the test. Not the joke itself. The test is what your face does next. If your jaw tightens, if your voice climbs half an octave, if you fire back with a joke of your own that lands 1 beat too hard, you have just handed the room a live wire. You have shown them the exact voltage it takes to make you flinch. And now that voltage is public information. The alternative is not suppression. It is not swallowing the rage and smiling through gritted teeth, because people can smell that from across a room, and it reads as weaker than an honest reaction. The alternative is closer to what Seneca described in his writing on anger, where he argued that reason does not exist to kill emotion. It exists to give it calm, not numbness. Calm. There is a difference, and it is the difference between a frozen lake and a lake that simply is not disturbed by wind. Marcus Aurelius ran an empire while being needled constantly by senators who wanted his throne, and his private notebooks, the ones we now call meditations, are full of the same instruction, repeated in different words. Today I escaped anxiety, he wrote, or rather, I discarded it, because it was within me, not from outside. That single reframing, that the sting comes from your own interpretation and not from the other person's mouth, is the entire mechanism behind behavior 1. The provocation is a stimulus. Your face is the response. And between stimulus and response there is a gap most people never notice they have the right to use. Here is what almost nobody says out loud about this skill. The people who master it are not calmer than everyone else internally. They are identical to you on the inside, in that exact moment. Heart rate spiking, jaw wanting to clench. The only difference is a half-second delay they have trained into themselves. A delay just long enough to choose the blank face instead of the reactive one. That half-second is the entire technology. It is not a personality trait. It is a rehearsed pause. And pauses can be built the same way a muscle is built, through repetition under smaller stakes, before you ever need it under larger ones. Watch what happens once you install that pause in a real scenario. The person who tried to humiliate you in front of the room delivered a joke, expecting a specific chemical reaction, a widening of the eyes, a stammer, a defensive joke, fired back too quickly. When none of that arrives, when your face simply holds, something strange happens to them instead. They start talking faster. They add a second joke to cover the silence, because silence in response to an attack is read by the nervous system as danger, not weakness. The room does not remember your silence as passive. They remember it as the moment the joke stopped being funny. I control my emotions. If you are willing to actually practice that half-second delay this week, type those exact 4 words in the comments right now, because saying it out loud, even in text, is the first rehearsal. Now, the second behavior builds directly on the first one, because staying silent under attack is only half the skill. The other half is staying silent in general. Behavior 2. You say less than what feels necessary. Most people believe conversation is a performance, where the goal is to fill silence with something impressive. Machiavellian operators, and long before them, most disciplined political survivors, understood the opposite. Every extra sentence you speak is information leaving your side of the table for free. Anxiety makes people talk. Nervous energy makes people over-explain a decision nobody questioned yet. Watch a job interview where the candidate is asked one simple question and answers for 4 straight minutes. Circling back, justifying, adding disclaimers nobody requested. That candidate is not being thorough. That candidate is leaking. The people who unsettle a room the most are rarely the loudest ones in it. They ask one question, receive an answer, and let it sit there, instead of immediately filling the space with a follow-up. That silence does something specific to the other person's nervous system. Humans are deeply uncomfortable with unfilled space in conversation, and the discomfort creates a pull, an urge to keep talking just to relieve the pressure, which means the quiet person is not passive at all. The quiet person is holding a kind of leverage the talkative person just handed them for free. There is a version of this that shows up constantly in negotiation research, where the first person to name a number, an explanation, or a justification is almost always giving away more than the person who simply waits. Machiavelli's advice on this was blunt. He believed a wise operator lets others expose their intentions first, because intentions revealed early can be countered, redirected, or used. Intentions kept private cannot be touched by anyone. Here is the part that separates this from simple shyness, because shyness and strategic silence look identical from the outside, but come from opposite places. Shyness withholds words because speaking feels dangerous to the person staying quiet. Strategic restraint withholds words because the silence is dangerous to whoever is desperate to fill it. One comes from fear, the other comes from control. Nobody watching from across the table can tell the difference by appearance alone, which is exactly why this behavior is so easy to install without anyone noticing you have changed at all. Try this the next time you are in a tense conversation and someone says something that would normally trigger a long defensive explanation from you. Answer in 5 words or fewer, then stop. Let the silence do the rest of the work. You will feel the urge to add a qualifier, a joke, an apology tacked onto the end. Resist it. The 5 words alone will do more damage to whatever manipulation was being attempted than a full paragraph ever could. Because the paragraph gives them material to argue with, and the 5 words give them nothing to grab onto, which brings us to the behavior that terrifies people more than almost anything else on this list, because it involves doing nothing at all. Behavior 3. You walk away without an explanation. There is a reason. Ghosting, cutting someone off without warning, ending a business relationship with a single short message instead of a conversation, produces such an outsized emotional reaction in the person left behind. It is not really about missing the person. Family therapist Pauline Boss coined a term for this exact phenomenon back in the 1990s, ambiguous loss, describing what happens when someone who mattered to you disappears from your life without a coherent explanation for why. The mind, she found, cannot file the event away as finished. It stays open, unresolved, replayed on a loop, because the nervous system treats an unexplained ending as more threatening than a painful but clear one. Psychologist Ari Kruglansky built an entire framework around something related, called need for closure. The drive humans feel to reach a firm answer on an ambiguous situation, simply to end the discomfort of not knowing. And here is the detail almost nobody mentions. Research into this shows the drive for closure has almost nothing to do with actually needing the information. It is an emotional regulation mechanism. People do not want the explanation because the explanation itself is useful. They want it because the not knowing is unbearable, and any explanation, even a bad one, even a false one, ends the unbearable part faster than sitting with the uncertainty. Which means the person who leaves without a word has, without intending it, handed the other person's brain an impossible assignment. There is no puzzle to solve. There is no message to reread 12 times looking for a hidden clue. There is only silence, and the silence becomes, by default, the loudest thing in the other person's life for weeks afterward. Machiavelli understood a version of this instinctively. He wrote that when a hard decision needs making, ending a partnership, rejecting a deal, cutting someone loose, it should happen quickly and without theatrical explanation, because prolonged, over-explained endings cause more damage than clean ones and weaken the authority of whoever is doing the leaving. This is not cruelty for its own sake, and it is worth being precise about that distinction, because there is a meaningful difference between abandoning someone mid-crisis out of spite and simply refusing to provide a performance of closure to someone who does not deserve access to your reasoning anymore. The behavior is not about damaging the other person. It is about refusing to hand over free emotional labor to someone who already used up their allotment of your explanations. Notice how differently this lands depending on who is doing it. When someone chronically over-explains every decision, every boundary, every no, they are training the people around them to expect a negotiation each time. The moment you remove the explanation entirely, you remove the negotiation along with it. There is nothing to argue with in silence. There is nothing to counter in an empty inbox. The absence itself becomes the final word, and final words, by definition, do not get rebutted. Type "walk away" now in the comments if you have ever owed someone an explanation. You no longer feel obligated to give them. Let that sit with you for a second before we continue, because the next behavior is where most people quietly fail without ever realizing it happened. Behavior 4. You do not collapse under pressure or under a stare. There is a specific kind of moment that reveals more about a person than almost any other social interaction. It is the extended, silent stare. A negotiation where the other side goes quiet and simply looks at you, waiting to see who blinks first, figuratively and sometimes literally. Most people cannot survive more than a few seconds of that silence without filling it, adjusting their posture, breaking eye contact, or laughing nervously to release the tension building in the room. The body gives away pressure long before the mouth does. A shift in breathing rate, a hand that moves to straighten clothing or touch the face. These are what researchers studying non-verbal behavior call micro-reactions, small involuntary signals that leak underneath conscious control. And skilled negotiators are trained specifically to read them, because the face can lie, but the breath and the hands are slower learners. The Stoic answer to this is older than any modern negotiation manual, and it is more precise than most people give it credit for. It is not about becoming numb to the pressure. It is about controlling the one variable that is always within your control, regardless of what is happening around you, which is your own interpretation of the moment. Marcus Aurelius wrote constantly about focusing only on what is within your power to change and treating everything else, including another person's silence, their stare, their attempt to unsettle you, as weather. Weather is not an insult. It simply exists, and you do not owe weather a reaction. Here is a detail worth sitting with. The people who handle a silent stare the best are rarely people who feel nothing during it. They are people who have simply practiced separating the physical sensation of pressure from the behavioral decision of what to do about it. Their heart rate may still climb, their palms may still sweat, but none of that reaches the surface, because they have trained the gap between sensation and visible reaction the same way a boxer trains the gap between getting hit and losing composure. The pressure is real. The collapse is optional. Practice this the next time a conversation goes quiet and you feel the urge to fill it. Keep your breathing at the same pace it was before the silence started. Do not speed it up to seem calm, because speeding it up on purpose is its own kind of performance, and skilled observers can spot a performed calm almost as easily as they spot panic. Let your breath simply continue as it was. That alone, more than any clever line you could say, is what makes a room start to wonder who actually has the advantage here. Behavior 5. You stop competing for the last word in an argument that was never about winning. Most disagreements are not actually about the topic being argued. They are about who gets to leave the conversation feeling correct, and the person who needs that feeling the most is, almost without exception, the person who ends up losing the exchange, because the need itself is visible. Watch two people argue about something trivial, whose turn it was to load the dishwasher, whose fault a missed deadline was, and pay attention not to the words, but to who keeps circling back after the conversation has clearly ended. That circling back is not persistence. It is a request for reassurance dressed up as an argument. Machiavelli's core insight about influence was never really about lying or manipulation in the cartoonish sense people assume. It was about need. He understood that the party with less need for a specific outcome always holds more leverage than the party desperate for it, regardless of who is technically right. A prince who needed the approval of his court was, by definition, controlled by that court. A prince who genuinely did not require their approval to act could not be maneuvered by anyone, because there was no lever left to pull. This shows up constantly outside of politics. The colleague who needs everyone in the meeting to agree with their idea will keep talking past the point where the idea has already been accepted, because the talking was never about the idea. It was about extracting a feeling of validation from the room. The colleague who does not need that feeling states the idea once, answers direct questions about it, and stops. Nobody in that meeting walks away thinking the second colleague was weaker for saying less. They walk away thinking that person clearly did not need the meeting's approval to know their own idea was sound. There is a specific trap worth naming here, because this behavior gets mistaken constantly for something it is not. Refusing to chase the last word is not the same as refusing to ever explain yourself. It is not stonewalling a partner who has a legitimate question, and it is not silent treatment dressed up in philosophy. The distinction is need. If you are withholding an explanation someone is owed simply to punish them, that is not detachment. That is control through deprivation, and it tends to poison exactly the relationships worth keeping. The behavior only works and only earns respect when what you are releasing is the compulsive need for approval from people whose opinion was never going to change the facts of the situation anyway. Practice this the next time an argument has clearly run its course, but the other person keeps pushing for you to admit something, agree with something, or validate their framing of events. Say your position once, clearly, then let it stand there without reinforcement. The urge to add one more sentence, one more piece of evidence, one more attempt to make them see it your way, is the exact urge that keeps you tethered to needing their agreement. Release the sentence. Keep the position. Behavior 6. You set a boundary immediately, and you do not apologize for it. There is a specific social move that almost everyone has experienced from both sides. Someone crosses a line, a comment that goes too far, a joke made at your expense in front of people, a request that quietly assumes you will say yes because you always have before. The test is not whether you notice the line was crossed. Nearly everyone notices. The test is what happens in the 10 seconds immediately afterward. Most people soften the correction before they have even finished delivering it. Sorry, I don't mean to make a big deal out of this, but that sentence structure, the apology bolted onto the front of a boundary, does something specific and costly. It tells the other person that your discomfort is negotiable, that if they push back slightly, express mild offense at being corrected, you will likely retreat the rest of the way and let the original line stay crossed. The apology is not politeness. It is a preemptive surrender clause, and people who are skilled at pushing boundaries know exactly how to hear it. The alternative is not aggression, and this distinction matters enormously, because plenty of people mistake harshness for strength. Don't do that again. Delivered flatly, without heat, without an accompanying explanation of why it hurt your feelings, without a joke to soften the delivery. Just the sentence, stated once, and then silence. The absence of an emotional performance around the boundary is what makes it land as fact rather than as a request for permission. A request for permission can be negotiated. A stated fact cannot. This connects directly to the joke that goes too far. A scenario worth walking through in detail because it captures the entire mechanism. Someone makes a comment that crosses a line at your expense, in front of a group, and the group laughs, partly at the joke, and partly out of the reflex to laugh at anything delivered with enough confidence in a social setting. The instinct most people follow here is to laugh along, to prove they can take a joke, to avoid becoming the person who ruined the mood. That instinct, followed enough times, trains everyone present that the line can be crossed again with no cost. The alternative response is not a bigger laugh and not a counter-insult. It is a flat, unbothered correction delivered in the same tone you would use to ask someone to pass the salt. Don't do that again. No smile required, no explanation owed. What makes this behavior difficult is not the boundary itself. Most people can identify where their line is. What makes it difficult is the discomfort of the silence that follows stating it, because the other person, and often the room, will wait to see if you retreat. If you fill that silence with a joke to relieve the tension, you have just handed the retreat back to them for free. If you let the silence sit exactly as long as it needs to, the boundary becomes permanent the first time, instead of requiring 6 repeated corrections before anyone takes it seriously. Type no more. Once. If you have ever apologized for a boundary, you had every right to set without one. Which brings us finally to the 7th behavior, the one I promised you at the start of this, the one that decides everything else on this list. Behavior 7. You leave the moment someone becomes a threat to your peace. Before the explosion happens, not after. Here is the pattern almost everyone gets backwards. Most people wait for proof. They wait for the blow-up, the public humiliation. The moment a toxic dynamic finally produces undeniable evidence that it needed to end. And only then do they act, exhausted, months or years later than they should have. The people who are hardest to manipulate do the opposite. They read the early signals, the small tests of what they will tolerate, the slight escalations disguised as jokes, the pattern of someone needing your energy to regulate their own emotions, and they leave during the calm part. Before the storm, the pattern always builds toward. There is a useful way to sort the people worth walking away from early, and it comes down to 3 recognizable types rather than a vague sense of bad vibes. The first is the person who only shows up when they need something and disappears the instant your own needs surface, treating the relationship as a one-way withdrawal system. The second is the person who requires conflict to feel connected to you, manufacturing small crises because calm feels, to them, like distance. The third is the person who tests boundaries specifically to see which ones will hold, not out of malice necessarily, but because a held boundary is less useful to them than a flexible one. None of these 3 require a dramatic final incident to identify. They show themselves early, consistently, if you are actually watching instead of waiting for permission to leave. The reason this behavior is harder than the previous 6 is not emotional, it is structural. Behaviors 1 through 6 can all be practiced in the middle of a relationship that continues afterward. You can stay calm under provocation and remain friends with the provoker. You can set a boundary and remain in the room. Behavior 7 requires ending something, often before you have a clean, socially acceptable reason that would satisfy an outside observer asking why. There is no ambiguous loss here to explain to anyone, because you are the one choosing the ambiguity, on purpose, before the wound gets deep enough to require an explanation at all. This is where the entire list closes its loop, back to where we started. The reactive person, the one who explains too much, the one who cannot survive a silence, the one who apologizes before setting a boundary, is also, structurally, the person who cannot leave early, because leaving early requires trusting your own read of a situation more than you trust the discomfort of being wrong about it. Every behavior on this list feeds into this one. The calm face under provocation, the withheld sentence, the walk without explanation, the unshaken posture under a stare, the released need for the last word, the boundary stated once. Each one is a rehearsal for the same underlying skill. Trusting your own perception enough to act on it before the damage requires acting. Machiavelli understood something about timing that most modern advice gets backwards. He believed the moment to act decisively is always earlier than instinct suggests, because waiting for certainty means waiting until the cost of acting has already multiplied past the point of easy recovery. The prince who waits for undeniable proof of betrayal has usually waited past the point where the betrayal could be cheaply avoided. The same arithmetic applies to a friendship, a job, a relationship, anything where your peace is the currency being spent without your consent. There is a genuine editorial position underneath everything covered here, and it is worth stating plainly instead of hedging it into vagueness. None of these 7 behaviors are about becoming cold, and none of them are a license to abandon people who deserve patience, explanation, and warmth. They are about refusing to spend your composure, your words, your explanations, and your presence on people who have shown you, repeatedly, that they will spend those things carelessly if you keep supplying them for free. The line between healthy detachment and cruelty is not a personality trait you either have or lack. It is a decision, made fresh in every single interaction, about who has actually earned your reaction. So here is the question worth sitting with after this ends. Of the 7 behaviors covered here, which one would have changed the outcome of the relationship, the job, or the argument that still bothers you the most? Answer honestly in the comments, because the answer usually reveals exactly which behavior you have been avoiding the longest. And if this changed how you think about even one relationship in your life right now. The next video breaks down the specific phrases manipulative people use to test whether a boundary will actually hold. Subscribe so you do not miss it.